I wanted to ask you a question, and you can ponder it in your mind and think about it just for a moment. And the question is pretty simple, and over the years we've kind of asked this before, is you don't need to shout it out or anything, but why are you here? Have you ever thought about it? I mean, we gather together and we sing a few songs and we pray some prayers and we study the Bible a little bit, don't we? But no amount of singing, praying, or studying will ever make a difference in your life unless you choose to bring it into your spirit and let it affect you. Anything apart from that is religion. It's doing something, hoping God notices, and you earn your way to Him, and that doesn't work. We're starting a new series, and it's about God's Word, and today we're talking about embracing God's Word. What does that look like? And it can be difficult the next 3 weeks because as we let His Word speak, sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed this, but sometimes His Word is rather uncomfortable. Has anybody ever noticed that? When He says, I want you to love your enemies and pray for them, those who speak against you and persecute you, that's not a rhetorical question. That's what He wants you to do, right? Well, that takes a whole lot of something that a lot of people don't have. Well, where do you get that something to do what His Word says? I want you to see this phrase that I saw this week. That's so much incredible truth. Look what it says. The church is a culture of truth, not a culture of feelings. Now look at it, just let it sink in. You see too many places and too many times that we flip that around, where the church has become about our feelings. But the church at its core, at its foundation, is a culture of truth. I want you to take a look at this. As Paul wrote to his spiritual son, Timothy, he wrote these words. He said, if I'm detained, you may know how people ought to conduct themselves in the house of God. In other words, he says, if I don't get back to you, if I don't come visit you in your church, he was writing a letter to Timothy, but that the whole church would read. He said, if I don't make it back to you, I want you to know that you ought to know how to conduct yourselves in the household of God. It wasn't meaning at church. He was talking about a lifestyle. He was talking about how we conduct our lives, because you are the temple of the Holy Spirit, right? You don't go to church, you are the church, because the church is in you. So he was telling Timothy that you may know how people ought to conduct themselves in the household of God, which is the church of the living God. And look what he says, the pillar and stay, or the prop and support. What keeps a building up? It's the props, it's the support, it's the foundation, it's the pillars. Well, what is the pillar of the church of the living God? Truth. The pillar and stay of the truth holds up the foundation of the church and teaches us and shows us how to conduct our lives in a way that's honoring who He is and what He's doing. Jesus said this in Matthew 19. He says, if you want to be perfect, go and sell all your possessions. Now, if you know the story, this guy who came to Him, a fairly young guy, but he had a lot of wealth. And he came to Jesus and asked, Jesus, what can I do to be saved? And Jesus said, great question. And then Jesus started listing a few of the commandments, and the young guy went, I've done that, I've done that, I've done. Almost in a way of saying, I've earned it, I've earned it, I've done it, I've done it. I've sang the songs, I've prayed the prayers, and I've studied the Bible. But Jesus was about ready to take him to a lot deeper, in a whole nother level than all of those other things. Because what did He tell him? He said, if you want to be perfect, other translations said, if you want salvation, Go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. Now, this was one of the only places where Jesus told somebody to do that. So be careful in making a doctrine out of something that Jesus never meant to be a doctrine. He was specifically talking to this one man who he knew was wrapped up in his wealth, that he needed to get rid of the wealth in order to find perfection or salvation. So he told him the way forward, the way to reach that was to sell everything he had, give it to the poor. But what was the young man's reaction? When he heard this, it was stunned. He went away sad, for he had many possessions, and we don't hear from him again. Who knows what happened to him? Then Jesus looked at his disciples after he relayed that story and saw this young man leave, and he said, I tell you the truth, it's very hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. And that just went against everything, because in their minds, if somebody was wealthy, it means they had the favor of God. If they were wealthy, God must have his hand upon them. And so the disciples, they were taken back. They were astounded. Verse 25, it says, the disciples astounded. They said, well, then who in the world can be saved? Who can make it? Who can? I mean, it seems impossible. So what's the bottom line? We should ask ourselves, is this true? Not, how did it make me feel? When you come to the Word of God, you shouldn't say, how does this make me feel? Or when you are in church, how did that song make me feel? Or how did that lesson make me feel? Or how did the teacher make me feel? Our first reaction, and he's trying to teach us because we need to learn this in the society and the culture that we're living in, is that true? Is this making sense? Because a lot of truth doesn't feel very good. And a lot of things that aren't true feel very good. And so if we are a culture of truth and not a culture of feelings, we first have to run everything by the prism of, is it true? Is it truth? And then what do I do with that truth? How do I react to that truth? How do I respond to it? How do I let it affect me? Otherwise, we're just singing the songs, praying the prayers, and studying the Bible, and it doesn't make any difference. A culture of truth. The second thing we have to remember in embracing God's Word is this, is that we cannot separate Jesus from what he says and still have the real Jesus. You know, this is where a lot of people are really getting off kilter and taking a road that gets them off of where that narrow road that Jesus is inviting us on, has always invited his disciples, is still inviting his disciples. And we're now in this place that things that Jesus would not be into, we're trying to justify. That Jesus never taught, we're trying to say is good because of our feelings in many ways, or somebody else's feelings, or we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. But we cannot separate Jesus from what he says and still have real Jesus. So be careful, because these go hand in hand. The culture of truth versus culture of feelings. A false Jesus versus a real Jesus. I'm afraid that many people are following a false Jesus because of their feelings. And you cannot separate Jesus from what he said. You want to know who Jesus is? Do you want to know who Jesus represents? Do you want to know who Jesus, what he wants to do and wants to accomplish? Read his words. And as you read his words, some of them are very uncomfortable. Because to the young rich man, he says, go and sell everything you have. And he went away sad. Because that was not what he was expecting to hear. But that's what Jesus told him. It didn't feel good, but it was truth. Mark chapter 8, Jesus said these words, if anyone is ashamed of me and my message, Jesus himself was saying, listen, if anyone is ashamed of me and what? My message, or what he says, right? If anyone is ashamed of that in these adulterous and sinful days, and I've got news for you, if you haven't figured it out, he was writing this 2,000 years ago. I'm not sure our days have gotten any less adulterous and any less sinful. He says, so the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Now, if all you're doing is singing the songs, praying the prayers, and studying the Bible occasionally, this could be very offensive. Because we look at it and go, Jesus would never be ashamed of anyone. Well, what did Jesus say? You cannot separate Jesus from what he says and still have the real Jesus. Jesus said that the Son of Man, he will be ashamed of those people when he returns again if they don't what? Listen to his message and put it into practice. That's truth. Now you can argue because it doesn't feel good, but be careful. Because maybe you're following a culture of feelings instead of a culture of truth. Before you jump on anybody's bandwagon, you better find out if it's a good bandwagon. Because it may look good on the outside, may have a fresh coat of paint, but when you get underneath the chassis, there might be a lot of rust there. And the wheels might be about ready to fall off. And if you're hitching yourself to that wagon, look out. John chapter 12, Jesus said this, but all who reject me and my what? My message. That which I have said. That's that which I say. But anyone who rejects me and the things I say will be judged on the day of judgment by the truth I have spoken. You can't separate Jesus from what he said. He says it very clearly. Someday we will stand in front of him and be judged on what he has said and our response to that. In Luke chapter 6, early on in his ministry, I love this story. He says, why do you call me Lord and do not practice what I tell you? I mean, this was early on with the disciples, and he was trying to tell the people that were following him because they followed him for what? For the miracles, right? Can we be real? They followed him for the feelings. Because sometimes they were hungry and he fed them. That's pretty good. That's a good feeling. Friends of theirs were sick and Jesus healed them. That's a good feeling. There were occasionally when people have died and he resurrected them. That's pretty good. So a lot of people follow Jesus for the miracles. But then he comes along with the message that's underneath the miracles. That's what? For everyone who comes to me and listens to my words in order to heed their teaching and does them, the words that I say, I will show you what he's like. And then he told a simple little analogy, what it's like when we listen to his word and put it into practice. He's like a man building a house who dug and went deep, way down, and laid a foundation upon the rock that he found when he dug down. And when the flood arose, the torrents broke, the house could not shake or move it because it had been securely built on a rock. But those who merely hear it, they might have feelings, but there's no truth with it, will not take the time to dig deep because it takes extra time and extra energy and extra expense to dig deep to find that rock, but they don't practice his words, and so they'll just build it on whatever ground they find, which is not really a foundation at all. And then when life happens, it collapses and falls. And often those are the people screaming the loudest at the church. You failed me. The leaders are no good. The elders are no good. They didn't help me in my time of need. But they didn't have a very good foundation because they chose not to have a good foundation. So we have a culture of truth versus culture of feelings. We have Jesus' words that you cannot separate from Jesus, otherwise you don't have the real Jesus. And the final truth I want to release this morning and get it is this: that the heart of discipleship is having our lives formed by God's word. It's not just by the songs we sing and the prayers we pray, but it's by letting God's word shape us, form us, take the edges off, add to what we need to add, and take away what needs to be taken away. Psalms 1 says this: "Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join in with them," right? "But they delight in the law of the Lord." They delight in His word, and they meditate it on a regular basis. Scripture says day and night, on a regular basis, they take the word, they read it, they chew on it, they ask the Spirit, what does this mean? How does it affect me? How can I put this into practice, even when it's uncomfortable? There's benefit for that. And Paul wrote these words: "Let the message about Christ in all its richness fill your life. Teach," look what it says, we're supposed to teach and counsel each other with all the wisdom that He gives. Where do we get His wisdom? Remember, not man's wisdom, not man's opinions, not man's thoughts, but we're supposed to teach and counsel each other with God's wisdom. We are to sing His psalms, we're to sing His hymns, we're to sing His spiritual songs to God with a thankful heart. When we do, something will happen inside of you. You'll become more like Him. And in truth, a lot like those who are not following Him. And that's where the separation comes, right? Even sometimes when they're in our own family or even in our own church. That could be hard. That could be difficult. And finally, John chapter 8, Jesus, I love this part. "Then many who heard Him say the things He did, they began to believe in Him. And Jesus said this to them, to those who believed in Him, who chose Him to walk after Him, 'You are truly my disciples if you,'" He put something very clear, very truth right after it. It wasn't that you did this, this, and this. It was that if you remain faithful to what? To His teachings. Not a way of doing church. Not a formula. Not a church growth way of looking at things. Not all the things we agree or disagree, but by Jesus' teachings. And those teachings will bring truth. And when you have truth, you will truly be free. So the last statement I'll leave with you is this: how we relate to Jesus' words determine whether we're a disciple or not. How we relate to Jesus' words determines whether you are His disciple. I didn't say whether you're a follower of His, because there were a lot of people who followed Him but weren't His disciples. Because a disciple is a devoted follower. And so how you relate to what Jesus says, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard, even when it's difficult, even when it goes against the flow, even when it goes against your feelings, tells you whether His disciples or not. So you see, it really doesn't have a whole lot about what I think or what I feel. It has really to go to what Jesus says. And I don't know of any better wisdom or counsel that you can give to somebody when they come to you with an issue, whether it's family, marriage, finances, job, relationships, whatever it is, when you point them to Jesus. Because anything else is kind of beginning to blur the lines. What did Jesus say? Or take the principles of Jesus and then release them. Does that make sense? So we must embrace God's word if we're going to truly be his disciples, if we're going to be changed, if we're going to be able to withstand the rains of culture, the winds of culture, the storms of society, because they're hitting wave after wave after wave of gender identity, of sexuality, of all of these cultural issues and cultural ideas and cultural thoughts. They're the waves that are crashing on the church. And unfortunately, many of the church are being led by their feelings. So instead of standing on the foundation that Jesus said, if you stand on that, the waves, they may hit you, but they're not going to bring you down. Because he said, I'll build my church that the gates of hell will never prevail against it. That's pretty powerful. And the gates of hell are now at the door, knocking. And then sometimes they're not knocking, they're banging, trying to get in. So be careful they don't get into your heart. I want to pray for you. Would you stand to your feet as we finish up today? Next week we're going to talk on the second part of the series, and it's basically saying responding to God's word. Today's a day of embracing it, of taking a fresh look and maybe even tweaking or bringing us into alignment with his word, to remember that it's not about what we think, feel about God's word, it's what he says, and then from there we go, right? Even though it could be difficult and hard. Next week we're going to look at how do we respond to God's word. Let's pray. Holy Spirit, thank you for teaching us, bringing us to the very door of truth, and then opening it for us and inviting us in and say, come and eat. Come and eat at the banquet table of my truth. For it will bring enlightenment. It will bring life. It will set you free. Lord, help us to know the real from the counterfeit. Help us to stand up for what you've said, not in an arrogant way or holier than thou way, but in a truth-loving way. Continue to teach us as we lean into you. And we thank you.